Representative Russ Diamond is a Republican from Lebanon County. You've introduced a joint resolution to amend the Pennsylvania Constitution to end no-excuse mail-in voting. Why?
Well, despite the fact that we've been doing mail-in voting here in Pennsylvania for over 4 years now, there's still a lot of people who really want to get rid of it. There's one easy fix to get rid of it. The Constitution specifies that we need to have in-person voting. It specifies that we need to have an absentee ballot system, but it doesn't limit it to just those two things. And, that's under the basis by which we created mail-in voting. So a simple change to our Constitution would limit it to those two methods of voting that are in the Constitution. So I believe that if people don't want to have mail-in voting in Pennsylvania, they should be able to go to the ballot and vote to determine whether we keep it or not.
Why approach it from a point of view of a constitutional amendment versus regular legislation?
Let the people have their say on the matter. I mean, it's that simple. It's like let's they were folks who were unsatisfied with this were unsatisfied because we didn't really have we didn't come to them and ask them first. So it's like now they want to have their say on it. So let the people decide.
Well, let's go back to the law that made the change,
right.
Act 77, right. 2019. Take us back there. Did you vote for that bill?
I did vote for that bill. And now remember, Act 77 was not just about mail-in voting. Actually, it began as a bill that was to fund the counties to buy new election machines after Governor Wolf decertified every machine in the state. Along with that was eliminating the straight party ticket option to vote, and mail-in voting was put in as it was like a big trade, and that's what happened. Those were the three big parts of that bill. So I did vote for that bill. I thought that mail-in voting, as we had described it, probably was not too hard to do. Turned out to be very, very confusing. It's caused a lot of confusion for our counties, a lot of extra work for our counties, and now more than 4 years down the road, people still say they want to go back to the way it was, and this is the simplest way to go back to the way it was.
Well, how popular is it? Because voters are using it.
Sure.
Correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who like no excuse mail-in voting, but it's a matter of let the people decide. So.
Where's the bill right now in the legislative process?
Well, we're at the beginning of the legislative session, so it's just been introduced. I'm trying to remember the bill number, 258, House Bill 258. It was just assigned a bill number last week. So that's where it's at. It's been introduced. There's been no committee meetings in Harrisburg at all so far. We've been in Harrisburg for 1 day. We were sworn in. Committees were formed. But the committees, assignments were made, but no committees have met yet, so we'll see where the bill goes.
Talk us through the process. So this is a joint resolution to amend the Constitution. What needs to happen from this point forward?
Right. So a joint resolution has to pass, has to be heard 3 days in the House, 3 days in the Senate, has to be approved by both the House and the Senate. But a joint resolution to amend the Constitution then has to come back in the next legislative session and go through that process a second time before it gets on the ballot for the people to vote on it.
Now, is this an issue that you expect to fall along partisan lines?
Probably would fall upon partisan lines, although, there's Republicans who are, totally in favor of keeping mail-in voting. There might be some Democrats who are against it. But in the end, what my bill does is it lets the people decide.
Now, as you've talked with your colleagues about this type of an issue, what have you been hearing from them?
Well, what my colleagues are more concerned about now is the confusion and the extra work this is causing our counties. And it costs extra money to do two sort of elections at once. Our counties are now covering, they're doing a mail-in election and they're doing an in-person election, and it's kind of overlapping duties. It's extra duties. So that's probably the biggest concern I hear from my colleagues now is this extra stress this has put on our counties. Now, I will credit credit our counties. We just got through a presidential election, and they did a pretty good job of making sure, all those ballots were counted by election night, and we knew who won. So credit to them. But if we can take some burden off them, I think some of my colleagues would go along with that.
Now, in the past, there were some legislative remedies offered that would address some of the issues that counties were having, like pre-canvassing times. Would you support those type of measures? Well,
a lot of people talk about pre-canvassing, but the truth of the matter is, again, we just got through one of the busiest election of all election cycles, and the counties did a good job without being able to pre-canvass before election day when they were. So I don't think that's so much of a concern. The bigger concern, I think, is the mistakes that are made in misprinting ballots, sending ballots to the wrong people, sending the wrong ballots to the right people, the right ballots to the wrong people, that sort of thing. So, and I think that's going to continue as long as we have mail-in voting, because those are human errors, and you're never going to eliminate those.
Have you talked to county officials about this particular issue?
I think county officials, my county officials, will probably be greatly relieved to not have to do a mail-in election at the same time they're trying to conduct an in-person election.
Now, the control of the House is very close, especially with Representative Gurgley's passing away.
Yes, sadly.
With the Democrats in marginal control of the House, what are the chances of you think this moving along?
Well, I think the Democrats are probably not inclined to move this bill, but things may change over time, and during this session, and we'll see what happens.
Now, another bill you're proposing is House Bill 119, which would affect daylight savings time.
Yep.
Tell us what your bill would do.
Well, my bill would stop the biannual process of changing clocks. That's my biggest concern. Everybody, I think, a majority of people agree that changing clocks twice a year is a bad idea. Now, there is some difficulty when you get to, okay, well, what time should it be when we stop changing clocks? Well, the truth is, under the Uniform Time Act of 1966, that's a federal law, the states can only choose to go one way if they stop changing clocks. They can remain on standard time. So that's what my bill does. I believe that Pennsylvania should lead, and our neighbors will follow.
So what does that mean at the practical level? So instead of making that change, people will be waking up when?
They will be waking up when they wake up, whenever they have to go to work. But what we won't be doing is springing forward in the spring and falling back in the fall. It'll just be instead of a leap forward, shoving you into darkness right at wintertime, and maybe enhancing that seasonal affective disorder. We would be gradually. We'll be gradually getting into summertime light and then gradually getting back into wintertime. And the reason I want to do this is because when you change clocks, there are public health and safety concerns. Increase in heart attacks, strokes, a decrease in productivity, increase in workplace accidents, decrease in academic achievement in the weeks following changing clocks twice a year. So those are not good for public well-being, and that's the main goal, is to stop changing clocks. But at the state level, the only thing we can do is remain on standard time.
Take us back in the past. Why do we have daylight savings time in the first place?
Well, it actually started mostly, it initially started in Germany in World War I. They did it to save energy. And then the United States picked up on it. We stopped it. And then we picked it back up in World War II. And the truth of the matter is now with LED lighting and modern day HVAC systems, the energy savings are negligible. And we're just kind of doing it by force of habit. I will note that in 1974, under the Nixon administration, the United States did try to do permanent daylight saving time, but it was quickly repealed because there were some children who were killed on the, waiting for the bus in the dark in the wintertime, going to school. So it was quickly repealed. It was very unpopular. Everybody thought it'd be a great idea, but once they got it, they changed their minds.
Are there other states that don't observe daylight savings time?
There are 2 states that don't observe daylight savings time, and that's Hawaii. And Hawaii's on an island out there, and Arizona does not either. Although parts of Arizona that are controlled by the Navajo tribe, they do observe daylight saving time. But I think that's because parts of their territory are also in different states that do observe daylight saving time. But I think, again, if Pennsylvania leads on this issue here in the East, I think our neighbors will follow quickly.
Has legislation like this been introduced in the past?
I've had this bill for 3 terms now, and it's got a committee. It got a committee vote 2 sessions ago when Republicans were in control. It didn't get a committee vote last session.
What do you think will change this time?
Not sure what will change this time. I mean, I think it's a good idea, and that's why I continue pressing on it. Look, this is for health and safety concerns, and most medical experts agree that if we remain on standard time, we'll be better off and we'll be a healthier Commonwealth.
Any indication whether Governor Shapiro would support this?
I have not heard anything from the governor's office on this.
Now, we're at the beginning of a legislative session, and part of that process is the swearing-in day for legislators. You also want to change that day. Tell us what your proposal would do.
Sure. I would like to have us sworn in on December 1st when our term begins. Our terms actually begin on December 1st. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to be sworn in. The reason I believe we should be sworn in is because under the changes that were made to the Constitution regarding disaster emergencies, the legislature has to respond to a governor's disaster emergency within 21 days. Now, if we had a disaster emergency such as the I-95 disaster or the East Palestine train derailment, if that would happen at the end of November in an election year, the legislature couldn't meet to actually renew that emergency if needed by the governor. We need to be on duty and ready to respond if an emergency happens.
So what needs to happen to make this change?
Well, we need to change the Constitution. This is another constitutional change. It would be a constitutional amendment. And, the Constitution doesn't say precisely when we can be sworn in. But it does say that we must meet on the first Tuesday of January every year. I just want to change that date to the first day of September or the first day of December every year. That way, the new members can be sworn in, and we don't have to get right down to full business, right? But we can be on duty and sworn in and be able to respond in case there is an emergency that needs addressed by the General Assembly.
What type of support are you seeing from your colleagues?
We've had a bunch of co-sponsors on this. I've seen some positive commentary from some colleagues in the news about it. It's an idea that, in previous years it wasn't a big deal. But since we made that constitutional change, I think it is a big deal because we need to be prepared to respond to emergencies. And if we're not sworn in, we can't act.
Take us back to that constitutional change. What happened and why 21 days?
I don't know why it was 21 days. Look, after COVID, we made the constitutional change. I actually provided that, there was a kind of powwows between the leadership teams in the House and the Senate. We were trying to decide. My contribution to that effort was simply to allow the General Assembly to terminate a disaster emergency without the governor's signature. Why somebody came up with 21 days and put that in, I'm not sure of the reasoning behind that. I think they were trying to find a time frame that was reasonable. Maybe some people wanted 10 days, some people wanted a month. I don't really sure. I wasn't in on that conversation, so I don't know why we landed on 21 days. But since we did land on 21 days, we need to be prepared to act within 21 days, regardless of when an emergency happens.
Now, this year you're also returning as the Republican chair of the Gaming Oversight Committee. Recently, a bill was introduced in the Senate that included co-sponsors like President Pro Tem Kim Ward and Majority Leader Joe Pittman that would begin a regulation process for skill games. What do you think about their bill?
Well, I haven't seen the actual language of the bill yet. What Senator Ward and Senator Pittman and Senator Gebhardt and Senator Brown, and there's 4 prime sponsors over there, are suggesting is that skill games be regulated and taxed in Pennsylvania and be regulated by the Gaming Control Board. I haven't seen the details of that bill, haven't seen the tax rate. I agree 100% that these games need to be regulated. We need to control where they are. Even the industry has asked us to regulate and tax them so that they can operate in an atmosphere where copycat illegal machines are not put next to them. And I agree with them wholeheartedly on that. What the details are in the Senate bill, I couldn't tell you, but I fully support being able to regulate these and keep them away from kids and make sure that we provide some sort of consumer protection as part of our regulations.
On the taxation side of it, do you think that there's an appropriate tax for those types of machines, and how much revenue do you think would be appropriate to collect on that?
Well, the industry itself is kind of supportive of a bill by Senator Gene Yaw, and that says the proposal there claims that it could provide $300 million a year for the Commonwealth. I have not seen the math behind that. I'm not privy to the math behind how they derive that. You know, how many machines, how much revenue per machine, and what's the tax rate? Well, the tax rate is set at 16% in that bill. So I'm not sure, you know, how many machines that is, so I couldn't tell you how much revenue that's... I just don't know. But $300 million is a significant chunk of money. So it all depends on how many machines you're going to have and what your tax rate is going to be.
How do you balance the spread of machines like these with the need to address issues like gambling addiction?
Well, I'm very concerned about I call it gaming addiction now because, you know, we have skill games, which technically is not gambling because there's an element of skill there. And then we have our casinos and our online gaming, and we also have, you know, the small games of chance, and, you know, we have the services of 1-800-GAMBLER, you know, that sort of thing. I call it gaming addiction now. I'm very concerned about that, and I was glad recently the Gaming Control Board was seeking to make it easier for people who are on our exclusion list to get back into the casino without actually filling out a form to get off the exclusion list. So I was glad that they backed off of that regulation, and I would actually ask them to make sure that everybody actually signs a form before they're off the exclusion list. So they, once again, before they start gaming again, regardless of what type it is, they have some acknowledgement that, hey, I had a problem gaming before, and I want to make sure that, you know, I'm being careful about this when we go in.
Are there any other issues relating to gaming that are on your agenda coming into this year?
Well, we kind of need to update our Small Games of Chance Act in Pennsylvania to help our clubs because there's some dollar limits that were set many moons ago, and, you know, with inflation and especially as it relates to some of those dollars that are supporting our volunteer first responder organizations, you know, there's been a great drop off in support and manpower for those organizations. So I would like to be able to be better support those organizations financially, and we need to make some changes there. There are changes, some of them as simple as allowing them to take a debit card to hold an online raffle, as we kind of did a waiver for that during COVID, and we should extend that, you know, so that they can do that, and it's a great fundraiser for them rather than standing out in the middle of the street with a boot or having a subsale, that sort of thing. So those are the kind of issues we're going to be tackling on the Gaming Oversight Committee this year.
Now, on Tuesday, February 4th, Governor Shapiro will be giving his annual budget address. What do you expect him to say?
I have no reasonable way to predict what he's going to say. I do think he'll probably ask for some more spending. He might even ask for some more taxation. But the truth of the matter is, his budget last year kind of spent down what we had in surplus, and I'm just not in the mood to ask the people of Pennsylvania to pull more money out of their pockets in tax dollars to finance bigger government. We need instead to make government work better, more efficiently, and smarter, rather than asking them, just give us more.
What types of policies would you like to see to help make government be more efficient and smarter?
Well, I think we always have to look at, cutting government waste. I mean, yesterday, as we tape this, President Trump was sworn in, and he created this DOGE department. And I think maybe we should do the same thing here in Pennsylvania. Have an examination and an overhaul of everything that we do here in Pennsylvania. Put everything on the table. Go, do we really need to be doing that? Are we spending too much here? Is it the most efficient use? Is it the best way to use Pennsylvania's tax dollars or not?
So this budget process includes not only the governor's speech, but then there are several weeks of budget hearings in the Senate and the House. And then after that, there are a lot of meetings that are often out of the public eye. Do you think that the budget process has enough transparency?
I mean, how transparent can you get? I mean, you're going to have all these budget hearings, and then, somebody has to start putting numbers on paper and talking back and forth between the House, the Senate, the governor's team. I mean, do you want cameras following that all around all the time? I mean, because in the end, before a budget gets run through the House or the Senate, it gets printed. Now, I will say that sometimes these budget documents do not get enough time for the members who are actually voting on them to fully comprehend them, and I wish introduction would come and we would have a pause and let us, take it all in. I think there's more transparency that could be used for members, but as far as public transparency, look, transparency is only as good as the people using the transparency. It's hard enough to get 253 members of the General Assembly and one governor to come to agreement. And I'm not saying the public shouldn't be privy to what's going on, but when you have all this feedback and input, it kind of convolutes the system and detracts from the ability to come to consensus. And look, that's what we're elected for. We're elected because the people back home trust us to make sound decisions on their behalf. And, I would love to have a budget in my hands a lot sooner than sometimes we get it. But if you bring the whole public in on the conversation, I think the conversation gets lost, and you're just not going to, because there's a lot of lines in this budget, 470 some lines in this budget. You're going to have 470 some different arguments and reasons not to vote for it, when it comes down. So look, that's our job. Our job is to represent the folks back home, and
Well, given the 470 lines that you mentioned, are there parts of the budget that you don't think get enough attention?
There's it varies from year to year. And, then sometimes, there are things that are traditionally held back. It used to be a tradition that the agriculture lines would not be filled, and it would be, held as a carrot out here to trade for this carrot over here. But every year is different. And, what I get concerned about is mostly the GGO lines. That's the General Government Operation lines. And I don't like to see those go up too much because I like to see government remain small. I would like to see it get smaller, but I don't want to see that GGO line grow bigger than inflation, because that just means we're growing government, the size of government, and that just means that the next year we come back, we're going to grow government even more.
We've been speaking with Representative Russ Diamond. He is a Republican representing a district in Lebanon County. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.